Dr. Martinez to the maternity ward. Dr. Martinez to the maternity ward. The hospital PA system crackled overhead as Sarah Mitchell sat in the sterile waiting room, her hands resting protectively on her 7-month pregnant belly. The familiar antiseptic smell mixed with her growing anxiety as she checked her phone for the fourth time in 10 minutes. Richard was late again. "Get your hands off me, Richard." Sarah's voice echoed through the sterile hospital corridor 30 minutes later. The sharp crack of his palm against her cheek silenced even the bustling nurses. The sound seemed to hang in the air like a thunderclap, followed by an awful, pregnant silence. Sarah touched her stinging cheek, her dark eyes wide with shock and humiliation. Around them, medical staff had frozen mid-step, their faces reflecting the same disbelief she felt. In 15 years of marriage, Richard had never crossed this line. Never. "You're embarrassing yourself, Sarah," Richard hissed through clenched teeth, his expensive cologne failing to mask the perfume that wasn't hers. "Think about who you're talking to." Dr. Patricia Chen, Sarah's attending physician, stepped forward with the practiced calm of someone who had seen too much. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to step back immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to get you back to your room right now." Richard straightened his $1,500 suit jacket, his steel gray eyes scanning the corridor as he realized how many witnesses had seen his moment of rage. His millionaire ex-husband facade was cracking, revealing something ugly underneath. "Sarah was being hysterical about a simple business meeting," Richard said loudly, as if volume could rewrite what everyone had just witnessed. "Pregnant women, you know how emotional they get." Sarah felt something shift inside her, something that had been building for months. The constant criticism, the mysterious absences, the way he controlled every dollar she spent while claiming they were struggling financially. The narcissistic abuse had been so gradual, so expertly delivered, that she had almost convinced herself it was normal. "I asked you where you were last night," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the red handprint blooming on her cheek. "I asked why you missed the last 3 appointments. That's not hysterical, Richard. That's being a concerned wife and mother." "Mrs. Mitchell, please," Dr. Chen said gently, taking Sarah's arm. "Your blood pressure was already elevated. This kind of stress could trigger early labor." Richard's expression shifted to calculated concern, the same look he used during business negotiations. "Of course, Doctor. Sarah, honey, you know I worry about you and the baby." But something had changed in Sarah's eyes. For the first time in years, she was looking at her husband clearly, without the rose-colored glasses of desperate hope. She saw the way his concern was performed rather than felt. She saw how he positioned himself between her and the nurses, still trying to control the narrative. "I've spent 15 years making excuses for you, Richard," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. 15 years pretending your business trips weren't affairs. 15 years believing we were broke while you wore $1,000 watches?" The color drained from Richard's face. "Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. The pregnancy hormones. Don't you dare blame my pregnancy for seeing you clearly for the first time." A hospital security guard named Tommy Rodriguez had been watching the entire exchange from the nurse's station. He recognized the Hartford name from company Christmas parties where he worked part-time security. Sarah Hartford Mitchell, daughter of William Hartford, the Fortune 500 CEO who had always treated the staff with respect and dignity. As Dr. Chen escorted Sarah back to her room, Tommy made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he had been given 3 years ago at a company event. "If you ever see anything that concerns you about any of our people," William Hartford had said, pressing his business card into Tommy's hand, "you call me directly." Richard watched his wife disappear around the corner, completely unaware that his father-in-law was about to receive a very interesting phone call from a hospital security guard who remembered how much William Hartford loved his daughter. In the private room, Sarah sat on the edge of the hospital bed while Dr. Chen checked her blood pressure. The numbers on the digital display made the doctor frown. "Sarah, Your pressure has spiked dangerously. Doctor, Chen said softly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has this happened before? Sarah's silence spoke volumes. Not the hitting, Sarah whispered, but the yelling, the threats, the way he makes me feel like I'm crazy for questioning anything he does. Dr. Chen sat down in the chair beside the bed, her expression serious but kind. Sarah, what you're describing is emotional abuse, and what happened in that hallway was assault. You don't have to go home with him today. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her daughter was kicking as if responding to the stress. I don't have anywhere else to go. All our accounts are joint, but he controls everything. I haven't worked since we got married. He said he wanted to take care of me. Taking care of someone doesn't include isolating them financially, Dr. Chen said gently. Do you have family friends? Sarah thought about her father, about the conversations they'd had over recent months, how he'd grown increasingly quiet when Richard's name came up, how he'd started asking careful questions about her happiness, her financial security, her plans for the future. My father, Sarah said finally, but Richard will be furious. He'll say I'm being dramatic, that I'm trying to damage his reputation. Sarah, your husband struck you in a hospital hallway in front of dozens of witnesses. His reputation damaged itself. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone began buzzing with a call from her father. She looked at the display with surprise and growing hope. Daddy, sweetheart, are you all right? Are you and the baby safe? Sarah's eyes widened. How did you know hospital security called me? Sarah, I need you to listen very carefully. I want you to come stay with me until the baby arrives. I'm sending a car to pick you up right now. For the first time in hours, Sarah felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. But Richard, let me worry about Richard. William Hartford's voice carried the same steel that had built a business empire. You focus on staying healthy and safe. After Sarah ended the call, she realized something profound had shifted. For months, she had felt completely alone in her marriage, trapped by financial dependence and her own diminishing confidence. But in one moment of crisis, she remembered she had never been alone at all. Richard returned to the hospital room 40 minutes later, carrying white roses and wearing his most charming smile. He had clearly spent the time crafting his approach, probably consulting with his legal team about damage control. Honey, I brought your favorites, Richard said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. I know I lost my temper, the stress of the baby, the business pressures. You know I would never hurt you intentionally. Sarah looked at the roses, remembering how he used to bring them after every major fight in the early years of their marriage. She had trained herself to see them as proof of his love rather than evidence of a pattern. I think you should leave, Richard. His carefully constructed expression faltered. What did you tell them, Sarah? You know how stress affects the baby. I told them the truth, that my husband hit me in a hospital corridor because I asked where he was last night. Richard set the roses on the bedside table with deliberate care, but Sarah could see his hands shaking slightly. One moment of frustration doesn't erase 15 years of marriage. Sarah, think about what you're doing. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. You can't just walk away from our life together, from everything I've built for us. Sarah looked at him carefully, noting the expensive suit, the gold watch, the silk tie that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. What you built, Richard, using my father's connections and contracts, living off my trust fund while telling me we couldn't afford basic things, that's not how business works, and you know it. I don't know how business works, Richard, because you've spent 15 years making sure I didn't understand our finances. That changes now. Richard realized his usual manipulation tactics weren't working. Sarah wasn't backing down, wasn't apologizing for making him angry, wasn't taking responsibility for his actions. Fine, he said coldly, his mask slipping completely. But when you come crawling back, don't expect me to just forget this betrayal. After Richard left, Sarah sat alone with the white roses, finally understanding what her mother had tried to tell her years ago. Love wasn't supposed to hurt. Love wasn't supposed to make you smaller, quieter, more afraid. Little did Richard know that while he was buying flowers and crafting apologies, his business empire was about to face the most comprehensive legal and financial assault of his career. Across town in a glass tower overlooking Central Park, William Hartford was mobilizing resources that would make Richard Mitchell's worst nightmares seem pleasant by comparison. Across town in a glass tower overlooking Central Park, William Hartford sat behind his mahogany desk reviewing quarterly reports when his private line rang. Only a handful of people had that number, and they only used it for emergencies. William Hartford. Mr. Hartford, sir, this is Tommy Rodriguez from Manhattan General Security. I hate to bother you, but it's about your daughter, sir. William's attention snapped to full focus. He had known Tommy for years, a reliable man who worked double shifts to support his own family. Tommy wouldn't call unless something was seriously wrong. Speak freely. Tommy, her husband just struck her in the maternity ward. Sir, in front of doctors, nurses, everyone. She's okay physically, but Mr. Hartford, I've seen domestic situations before. This wasn't a first-time thing. William felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. He thought about his late wife, Margaret, who had always worried about Sarah's choice in men. Margaret had seen something in Richard that William had missed during the business negotiations that brought them together 15 years ago. Thank you for calling me, Tommy. I won't forget this. Sir, your daughter looked like she needed to know she wasn't alone. After hanging up, William sat in silence for exactly 30 seconds, then pressed his intercom. Patricia, hold my calls, and get me Richard Mitchell's business attorney on the line. Then I need Marcus Webb in my office within the hour. Patricia Thornton, his head of legal affairs, didn't ask questions. In 20 years of working for William Hartford, she had learned to recognize the tone that meant someone had made a very expensive mistake. Marcus Webb, William's private investigator, arrived at Hartford Industries 35 minutes later, a former FBI agent with a reputation for thoroughness. Marcus specialized in corporate investigations and personal security matters. Marcus, I need everything you can find on Richard Mitchell. Financial records, business dealings, personal life, everything. How deep do you want me to dig? Deep enough to find out who my son-in-law really is. While Marcus left to begin his investigation, William called Sarah at the hospital. Hearing the relief in her voice when he offered her sanctuary confirmed his worst fears. His daughter had been living in fear, isolated and financially controlled by a man William had trusted with her happiness. 2 hours later, Patricia Thornton knocked on William's office door carrying a thick folder. You're going to want to see this, Patricia said, settling into the chair across from his desk. I pulled every contract, every loan, every business relationship between Hartford Industries and Mitchell Development Corporation. She opened the folder and spread documents across the polished surface. Richard has been using Hartford Industries contracts as collateral for personal loans, loans he never disclosed to Sarah. William studied the bank statements and loan documents. How much are we talking about? $2.7 million. William, money that should have gone into joint accounts with Sarah. He's been planning his exit strategy, William said quietly, keeping Sarah financially dependent while building a secret nest egg. It gets worse. Patricia pulled out another set of documents. These loans were secured against future Hartford Industries contracts. If we terminate our business relationship with Mitchell Development, Richard defaults on everything. William looked up from the papers. What's the timeline on contract termination? Most of our agreements have moral turpitude clauses. Domestic violence against a pregnant woman would certainly qualify. We could terminate immediately with 30 days' notice. Do it. William, if we pull out, Richard's entire business model collapses. Mitchell Development Corporation will be bankrupt within 60 days. Good. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. I'll need to coordinate with our other subsidiaries, Richardson Construction, Hartford Properties, Meridian Consulting. If they all withdraw simultaneously, Richard Mitchell will discover what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Marcus Webb called William's direct line at 4:30 that afternoon. I found something you need to hear immediately, Marcus said. Can you put me on speaker? William activated the speakerphone as Patricia listened intently. Richard Mitchell has been systematically hiding assets from Sarah for over 2 years, Marcus reported. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, a second property in Miami under his mother's maiden name. And William, there's more. I'm listening. Her name is Victoria Castellanos, 26 years old, works at Mitchell Development as a marketing coordinator. Richard's been paying for her Manhattan apartment for 8 months. William felt his jaw tighten. Evidence, bank transfers, lease agreements, photographs. Richard Mitchell has been living a double life while keeping his pregnant wife in the dark about their true financial situation. Patricia was already making notes. Marcus, I need copies of everything. Bank records, property deeds, photographs, witness statements. Already prepared. I'm sending everything to your secure email now. After Marcus disconnected, William and Patricia sat in silence, reviewing the evidence of Richard's deception and betrayal. He's been gaslighting her, Patricia said finally, making her believe they were struggling financially while he was maintaining a second household. William thought about the conversations he'd had with Sarah over recent months, how she'd mentioned being denied credit cards, being told they couldn't afford things, being made to feel guilty for basic expenses. Patricia, what are our options? Legally, we can file for divorce on grounds of adultery, financial fraud, and domestic violence. Financially, we can freeze all joint accounts, force full asset disclosure, and ensure Sarah receives everything she's legally entitled to. What about criminal charges? The assault at the hospital gives us domestic violence charges. The hidden assets could constitute fraud. The tax implications of those offshore accounts might interest the IRS. Aqueductum. William made his decision. I want you to file papers to freeze all joint accounts tomorrow morning. I want Richard Mitchell to wake up unable to access a single dollar of shared money. And the business contracts, every Hartford Industries subsidiary terminates their relationships with Mitchell Development Corporation, effective immediately. I want Richard to understand the full scope of his mistake. As Patricia gathered her files, William's intercom buzzed. Mr. Hartford, your daughter is here. William looked up to see Sarah standing in his office doorway, holding a small overnight bag. She looked fragile and exhausted, but there was something new in her eyes, something that looked like determination. Daddy, I need to tell you something about Richard. Sweetheart, I already know. Come sit down. As Sarah settled into the chair beside Patricia, William realized this wasn't just about protecting his daughter anymore. This was about showing every other woman trapped in a similar situation that abuse had consequences, that wealthy men weren't above the law, and that sometimes the people who love you will move mountains to keep you safe. Richard Mitchell had no idea that while he was buying flowers and crafting apologies, his business empire was about to face the most comprehensive legal and financial assault of his career. By morning, his millionaire ex-husband lifestyle would begin its spectacular collapse, and the narcissistic abuse he had inflicted for years would finally meet its match. The war for Sarah's freedom was about to begin, and William Hartford had every intention of winning. The next morning, Sarah woke up in her childhood bedroom for the first time in 15 years. Sunlight streamed through the familiar windows as she listened to the sounds of Manhattan awakening below. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was and why. Then she felt her daughter kick, and everything came rushing back. Her phone had been buzzing since dawn with calls and texts from Richard, each message growing more desperate and angry. She had turned it to silent and placed it in a drawer, but she could still see the screen lighting up every few minutes. Dr. Chen had scheduled a follow-up appointment to monitor Sarah's blood pressure and check on the baby's development after yesterday's traumatic incident. Sarah arrived at the hospital with her father's driver, noting how different everything felt when she wasn't walking on eggshells. How are you feeling this morning, Doctor? Chen asked as she checked Sarah's vital signs. Strangely clearer, like I've been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to breathe. The blood pressure reading was significantly improved. 140 over 90, much better than yesterday's 160 over 100. Sometimes removing the source of stress is the best medicine we can provide. As Dr. Chen continued the examination, Sarah found herself talking about things she had never said aloud before. The gradual erosion of her confidence, the way Richard had slowly isolated her from friends and family, how he had convinced her that his criticism was just his way of helping her improve. Sarah, what you're describing is a textbook pattern of financial and emotional abuse, Dr. Chen said gently. The fact that you're recognizing it now means you're already healing. I keep thinking about my mother. She died 3 years ago, and toward the end, she kept asking me if I was happy. Really happy. I kept telling her yes, but now I realize she could see what I couldn't. Wise mothers often do. After the appointment, Sarah decided to visit her mother's grave. She hadn't been there in months because Richard always found reasons why they couldn't make the trip. Too busy, too expensive, too emotional for someone in her condition. At Woodlawn Cemetery, Sarah knelt beside Margaret Hartford's headstone, placing fresh flowers she had bought with her own credit card for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I let him make me smaller. Sarah's voice was steady, but tears streamed down her face. But I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make sure my daughter never thinks love is supposed to hurt. Her phone buzzed with a call from her father. How did the appointment go? Better. Much better. Daddy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. How long have you known about Richard's affairs? William was quiet for a long moment. I suspected for about 6 months. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago to confirm what I feared. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you had to see it for yourself. If I had just presented you with evidence, you might have blamed the messenger instead of the message. Sarah realized the wisdom in her father's approach. What else do you know? Enough to ensure you and the baby will be financially secure for the rest of your lives. Enough to make sure Richard faces consequences for 15 years of deception. That afternoon, William's investigator, Marcus Webb, came to the penthouse to brief Sarah directly on his findings. The evidence was overwhelming and deeply humiliating. Your husband has been maintaining a relationship with Victoria Castellanos for over a year, Marcus explained, showing Sarah photographs and financial records. He's also hidden significant assets in offshore accounts and purchased property under false names. Sarah studied a photograph of Richard and Victoria at an expensive restaurant, laughing over champagne. The picture was dated 2 weeks ago, while she had been home dealing with pregnancy complications alone. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $4.2 million in hidden assets, plus the value of the Miami property and various investments he made without your knowledge. Sarah felt oddly detached from the numbers. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that she almost couldn't process it emotionally. There's something else, Marcus continued carefully. Victoria Castellanos has agreed to testify about Richard's behavior in their relationship. She's apparently grown uncomfortable with the situation, especially after learning about the assault at the hospital. She'll testify against him. She says Richard told her you were separated and planning to divorce. When she discovered you were living together and expecting a child, she realized she'd been lied to as well. Patricia Thornton arrived that evening with preliminary divorce papers and a comprehensive legal strategy. Sarah, we can file on grounds of adultery, domestic violence, and fraud, Patricia explained. Given the hidden assets and the assault, you're entitled to significant damages beyond standard asset division. I don't want to destroy him, Sarah said quietly. I just want to be free. Sarah, her father interjected gently, Richard destroyed himself. We're just documenting what he did. As they reviewed the legal documents, Sarah's phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the display, and for the first time, she decided to answer. Hello, Richard. Sarah, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. We need to talk about this situation rationally. I think we're past rational conversations. Don't you? One mistake, Sarah, one moment of frustration doesn't justify blowing up our entire life together. Sarah looked at the photographs of Richard with Victoria, the bank statements showing hidden accounts, the evidence of years of systematic deception. One mistake, Richard. Which mistake? Hiding $4 million from me, maintaining an affair for over a year, hitting me in front of hospital staff. Which single mistake are you referring to? The silence on the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. How did you... Sarah, whatever lies people are telling you. Richard, I'm looking at photographs, bank statements, property deeds. These aren't lies. They're evidence. Sarah, you don't understand business. Those accounts were for tax purposes. Victoria is just a colleague. Everything I've done has been to protect our family's future. Sarah felt something snap inside her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced yesterday in the hospital corridor, but stronger. Our family's future, Richard. You've been planning your exit strategy for 2 years while keeping me financially dependent and pregnant. You've been protecting your future, not ours. Sarah, please, come home and we'll discuss this privately. Like adults. I am home, Richard, and we'll discuss this in court. After hanging up, Sarah realized she felt lighter than she had in years. The fear that had controlled her for so long was gone, replaced by something she barely recognized: her own power. How does it feel? Her father asked gently. Like waking up from a nightmare I didn't realize I was having. That night, as Sarah lay in her childhood bed listening to her daughter's movements, she thought about the woman she used to be before she married Richard. Confident, ambitious, unafraid to speak her mind. Somehow, over 15 years, that woman had been gradually erased, replaced with someone smaller and more afraid. But she was still there, Sarah realized. That strong woman had just been buried under years of criticism and control, and now she was fighting her way back to the surface. Richard Mitchell was about to discover that the frightened, dependent woman he had married no longer existed. In her place was someone he had never met before: Sarah Hartford Mitchell, daughter of a Fortune 500 CEO, mother of the next generation, and a woman with nothing left to lose. The real battle was about to begin. The next morning, while Sarah rested safely in her father's penthouse, William Hartford convened an emergency meeting in the Hartford Industries Executive Conference Room. Present were Patricia Thornton, head of legal affairs, Marcus Webb, the private investigator, and 3 senior executives from Hartford's subsidiary companies. Gentlemen, what we discuss in this room stays in this room, William began, his voice carrying the authority that had built a business empire. My daughter has been the victim of domestic violence and systematic financial fraud. We're going to respond accordingly. Marcus Webb opened his briefcase and spread documents across the polished conference table. The scope of Richard Mitchell's deception is extraordinary. He's been preparing for this divorce for over 2 years while keeping Sarah completely in the dark. Patricia reviewed the evidence methodically. Hidden assets totaling $4.2 million. A second residence in Miami worth approximately $800,000. Ongoing financial support for his mistress, Victoria Castellanos, and systematic use of Hartford Industries contracts as loan collateral without disclosure. David Richardson, head of Richardson Construction, studied the loan documents. He's been pledging our future contracts as security for personal investments. If we terminate our relationship with Mitchell Development, he defaults on everything, which is exactly what we're going to do, William said firmly. The cascade effect will be immediate, Patricia explained. Mitchell Development Corporation depends entirely on Hartford Industries contracts for revenue. Without them, the company will be insolvent within 30 days. Honey, Marcus pulled out a thick folder filled with photographs and financial statements. There's more. Richard has been systematically transferring marital assets to personal accounts for 18 months. Money that legally belongs to Sarah has been moved offshore and invested in his name only. William felt his anger building as he studied the evidence of his son-in-law's calculated betrayal. What about the other woman? Victoria Castellanos has agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation, Marcus reported. She claims Richard told her he was separated and planning to divorce. When she discovered Sarah was pregnant and living at home, she realized she'd been manipulated as well. She'll testify, absolutely. She's documented their entire relationship, including text messages, financial transfers, and photographs. Richard was apparently very careless about covering his tracks. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. With Victoria's testimony and the financial evidence, we have grounds for divorce based on adultery, fraud, and domestic violence. The hidden assets alone entitle Sarah to significant damages. William leaned back in his chair, processing the full scope of Richard's deception. What's our strategy? Multi-pronged attack, Patricia replied. First, we freeze all joint accounts immediately. Second, we file for divorce with full asset disclosure requirements. Third, all Hartford Industries subsidiaries terminate their contracts with Mitchell Development simultaneously. Timeline. Papers can be filed this afternoon. Account freezes effective immediately. Contract terminations with 30 days notice, which is legally required but will trigger immediate loan defaults. Marcus cleared his throat. William, there's something else. Richard has been meeting with his own legal team since yesterday. They're preparing a defense strategy that involves attacking Sarah's mental state and claiming the pregnancy has made her unstable. William's expression darkened. Explain. He's going to argue that Sarah is having a mental breakdown, that she's imagining abuse that didn't happen, and that she's being manipulated by you to destroy his business unfairly. The hospital has security footage of him hitting her. He's claiming she was hysterical and he was trying to calm her down. His lawyers think they can spin it as protective rather than abusive. Patricia shook her head. They're going to blame the victim. Classic narcissistic abuse strategy. William stood up from the conference table. Then we make sure the evidence is so overwhelming that his spin falls apart under scrutiny. Over the next several hours, the Hartford Industries legal team worked with military precision to dismantle Richard Mitchell's life. Bank accounts were frozen, contracts were terminated, and legal documents were filed with devastating efficiency. At 2:30 that afternoon, Richard Mitchell sat in his glass office at Mitchell Development Corporation, completely unaware that his business empire was crumbling around him. His assistant, Jennifer, knocked nervously on his door. Mr. Mitchell, there are some gentlemen here to see you. They say it's about Hartford Industries. Richard straightened his tie and checked his reflection in his office window. He assumed this was about damage control from yesterday's incident at the hospital. He was wrong. 3 men entered his office. Patricia Thornton, David Richardson from Richardson Construction, and a legal representative from Hartford Properties. Mr. Mitchell, Patricia began formally, we're here to discuss the immediate termination of all contracts between Hartford Industries and Mitchell Development Corporation. Richard's confident smile faltered. On what grounds I have ironclad agreements with William? Patricia placed a thick folder on Richard's desk. Breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation of assets, and moral turpitude clauses that apparently you forgot existed in your contracts. Richard opened the folder and saw photographs of himself with Victoria, bank statements showing hidden accounts, and loan documents using Hartford Industries contracts as collateral. You can't do this, Richard said, his voice rising. Sarah won't let you destroy her husband's company. Mr. Mitchell, Patricia replied calmly, Sarah is the one who asked us to review all existing agreements. The color drained from Richard's face as he realized the magnitude of his situation. Without Hartford Industries contracts, Mitchell Development Corporation was worthless. Every loan, every investment, every business relationship depended on that connection. This is vindictive, Richard said desperately. One moment of stress doesn't justify destroying 15 years of business relationships. David Richardson spoke for the first time. Mr. Mitchell, You used our contracts as loan collateral without disclosure. That's fraud, regardless of what happened at the hospital. I need to call Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell is not taking your calls, Patricia said. All future communication should go through legal counsel. After the Hartford Industries representatives left, Richard sat alone in his office, staring at the evidence of his own destruction. His carefully constructed double life was completely exposed. His financial security was evaporating, and his wife had declared war on everything he had built. His phone started ringing immediately. Creditors, investors, business partners. Word traveled fast in Manhattan's business community. By 4 o'clock, Richard Mitchell's reputation was in free fall. Meanwhile, Sarah was having lunch with her father at his penthouse, feeling more peaceful than she had in years. How does it feel to fight back? William asked. Like I'm remembering who I used to be before I married him. Your mother always said you were the strongest person she knew. She just worried that Richard was making you forget your own strength. Sarah touched her growing belly, feeling her daughter moving restlessly. I want her to grow up knowing that love doesn't require sacrifice of self, that real partnership means building each other up, not tearing each other down. She'll know, sweetheart, because she'll have you as an example. That evening Marcus Webb called with an update on Richard's response to the day's events. He's panicking, Marcus reported. His lawyers are advising him to settle quickly and quietly, but Richard is refusing. He thinks he can still manipulate Sarah into backing down. He doesn't know Sarah at all, does he? William observed. 15 years of marriage and he never realized he was married to a Hartford, Patricia added. He's about to learn what happens when you underestimate this family. Sarah smiled, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years, the power of knowing she wasn't alone. Richard had spent so long convincing her that she was weak and dependent, but surrounded by people who believed in her strength, she was remembering who she really was. The millionaire ex-husband who had controlled her for 15 years was about to face the full force of a woman who had finally decided to stop being afraid. And Richard Mitchell had no idea what was coming for him. 72 hours after the hospital incident, Richard Mitchell made the mistake of his life. Rather than following his lawyer's advice to communicate only through legal channels, he decided to confront the situation directly. At 7:30 on Thursday morning, Richard arrived unannounced at William Hartford's penthouse building, bypassing the usual protocols by claiming a family emergency involving Sarah and the baby. Mr. Hartford, the building concierge called upstairs. Richard Mitchell is in the lobby. He says it's urgent regarding Mrs. Mitchell and the baby. William, who was having breakfast with Sarah, looked at his daughter with raised eyebrows. Send him up. James. This should be interesting. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety, then caught herself. This was her father's home, her safe space. Richard had no power here. Do you want me to handle this alone? William asked gently. No. I need to face him. I need him to see that I'm not afraid anymore. The elevator doors opened, and Richard Mitchell stepped into the Hartford penthouse foyer, looking like a man whose world was collapsing. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face showing the strain of 3 sleepless nights. William, we need to talk, Richard said, attempting his usual commanding tone, but sounding desperate instead. Mr. Mitchell, William replied formally, not inviting him to sit. What brings you here at this early hour? You're destroying everything I've worked for, Richard said, his composure cracking. Sarah is my wife. That's my child she's carrying. You have no right to interfere in our marriage. I gained the right when you raised your hand to my daughter in a hospital corridor. Richard's jaw tightened. It was one moment of frustration, one mistake. Sarah knows I would never hurt her intentionally. Richard! William's voice was steel wrapped in silk. It wasn't one moment. It was 15 years of financial manipulation, emotional abuse, and systematic deception. Yesterday, I received a full report on your activities. What report? William walked to his desk and returned with a thick folder. $4.2 million in hidden assets, A maintained mistress, property purchased under false names. Shall I continue? Richard's face went white. That's private financial information. You have no legal right. I have every legal right to investigate fraud committed against my daughter. From the living room archway, Sarah's voice cut through the tension. Hello, Richard. Both men turned to see Sarah standing calmly in the doorway, wearing a simple dress that showed her pregnant figure, her hair pulled back, her expression serene but unbreakable. Sarah, thank God. Richard moved toward her, but she held up her hand. Don't come any closer. Sarah, we need to talk about this rationally. Your father has poisoned you against me, filled your head with lies and misunderstandings. Sarah walked into the room and sat down in her father's leather chair, a position of power rather than submission. Show him the photographs. Daddy. William opened the folder and placed 8 by 10 photographs on the coffee table. Richard and Victoria at restaurants, entering her apartment building, embracing on a Miami beach. Sarah, I can explain. Explain which part? Richard, the part where you told her we were separated, the part where you bought her apartment furniture with money from our joint account, or the part where you took her to Miami using the property you bought with money hidden from me? Richard stared at the evidence of his exposed double life, realizing that his carefully constructed lies were completely unraveled. Sarah, Victoria means nothing. She was just something that happened. You're my wife. You're carrying my child. Richard, stop. Sarah's voice was firm and clear. Stop lying. Stop manipulating. Stop pretending this was some accident instead of a calculated betrayal that lasted over a year. The pregnancy hormones are making you think irrationally. Don't you dare blame my pregnancy for seeing you clearly for the first time in 15 years. Richard realized his usual tactics weren't working. Sarah wasn't backing down, wasn't taking responsibility for his actions, wasn't allowing herself to be gaslit into submission. Fine, Richard said, his mask slipping completely. You want the truth? Yes. I had an affair. Yes, I kept separate accounts. But everything I did was to protect our financial future. You don't understand business. Sarah, you never have. I understand theft. Richard, I understand fraud. I understand lies. Those accounts were investments. In your name only. Accessible only by you. While you told me we couldn't afford basic things, you were maintaining a second household and planning your exit strategy. William watched his daughter with pride as she calmly dismantled Richard's attempts at manipulation. This was the woman Margaret had raised, the strength that had been buried but never destroyed. Richard turned to William in desperation. You can't destroy my business over a marital dispute. Hundreds of people work for Mitchell Development. You're hurting innocent families. I'm protecting my family, William replied. Your employees can find jobs with companies that don't engage in fraud. This is vindictive. This is consequences, Sarah interrupted. For 15 years, you've acted without consequences because I made excuses for you, because I took responsibility for your moods and your choices and your treatment of me. That ends now. Richard's desperation was becoming more apparent with every failed manipulation attempt. Sarah, please, come home. We can work this out privately, like adults. Richard, I am home. The simple statement hit Richard like a physical blow. For the first time, he seemed to understand that this wasn't a negotiation. Sarah wasn't planning to come back. This was permanent. You can't just throw away 15 years of marriage. I'm not throwing it away. Richard, you already did that when you decided to abuse and betray me instead of love and respect me. Sarah, I love you. No. Sarah stood up from the chair, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Love doesn't hit. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't diminish. What you did to me for 15 years wasn't love. Richard, it was control. This was the moment that would haunt Richard Mitchell for the rest of his life, standing in that penthouse living room. He realized he was looking at a woman he had never actually known. For 15 years, he had been married to his own projection of what Sarah should be, never bothering to discover who she actually was. And who she actually was, it turned out, was someone far stronger than he had ever imagined. Your choice is simple, Richard, William said quietly. Cooperate with an amicable divorce settlement, or fight us in court and lose everything, including your professional reputation. Richard looked between father and daughter, searching for any weakness he could exploit, any crack he could widen. He found nothing but resolve strength. This isn't over, Richard said as he walked toward the elevator. Yes, it is, Sarah replied. It's been over for a long time. I just didn't realize it yet. After Richard left, Sarah and William sat in comfortable silence, processing what had just occurred. How do you feel? William asked. Free, Sarah said simply. For the first time in 15 years. Completely free. Outside on the street below, Richard Mitchell walked to his car, knowing his old life was over. What he didn't know was that his new life was about to get significantly worse. Sarah Hartford Mitchell had found her voice again, and she was done being anyone's victim. The narcissistic abuse that had controlled her for so long had finally met its match, the truth, backed by resources, supported by love, and defended by a woman who had remembered how strong she could be. Richard's millionaire ex-husband lifestyle was about to become a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the people who love the woman you're hurting. 2 weeks after the confrontation at William's penthouse, Richard Mitchell sat in his attorney's office receiving the worst news of his life. His lead counsel, Robert Steinberg, spread legal documents across his desk with the expression of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. Richard, they're asking for everything, Steinberg said grimly. Full asset disclosure, forensic accounting of all business and personal accounts going back 5 years, and damages for fraud and emotional distress. Can they do that? With the evidence they have? Yes. The hidden assets alone constitute marital fraud. The domestic violence charge makes it worse. And Richard? Steinberg paused uncomfortably. There's something else. What? Victoria Castellanos has agreed to testify against you. She's provided text messages, photographs, financial records, and a detailed timeline of your relationship. Richard felt the walls closing in around him. She can't do that. She's just as guilty as I am. Richard, she's not married. You are. And according to her testimony, you told her you were separated and filing for divorce. She claims she was deceived as well. Meanwhile, across town at the Hartford Industries legal offices, Patricia Thornton was orchestrating the most comprehensive divorce strategy of her career. Sarah sat beside her, reviewing documents and making decisions with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. The forensic accounting is complete, Patricia reported. Richard hid $4.7 million in assets, including the Miami property, offshore investments, and cash transferred to personal accounts. How is that possible? Sarah asked. He used your trust fund distributions and his business profits to build a secret portfolio while claiming you couldn't afford basic expenses. It's systematic financial abuse. Sarah studied bank statements showing her own trust fund money being diverted to accounts she never knew existed. I gave him power of attorney over my trust 3 years ago when I was having complications with my first pregnancy. I lost that baby, but he kept the power of attorney. He's been stealing from you for 3 years. Sarah, money that was legally yours was invested in his name only. Dr. Chen had been monitoring Sarah's progress throughout the legal proceedings, and the results were remarkable. Her blood pressure had stabilized, her stress levels had decreased significantly, and the baby was developing normally. Sometimes, Dr. Chen told Sarah during a routine appointment, removing toxic stress is the best medicine we can prescribe. Your body is recovering from years of chronic anxiety. I didn't even realize how tense I was all the time, Sarah admitted. I thought that was just normal married life. Sarah, healthy marriages don't require constant vigilance. Love shouldn't feel like walking through a minefield. As the legal battle intensified, Sarah found herself growing stronger rather than weaker. Each piece of evidence against Richard, each revelation of his deception, served to confirm that leaving him was the right decision rather than a mistake. Marcus Webb's investigation had uncovered additional affairs beyond Victoria Castellanos. 3 other women had been involved with Richard over the past 5 years, each one believing they were his only secret relationship. "He's a serial cheater," Marcus reported during a strategy meeting. "The pattern goes back to almost the beginning of your marriage, Sarah." Sarah felt oddly detached from this news. The betrayal was so complete, so systematic, that she had moved beyond emotional devastation into a kind of clinical clarity. "What about his business?" Sarah asked. "Mitchell Development Corporation is hemorrhaging money," Patricia replied. "Without Hartford Industries contracts, he can't meet his loan obligations. The company will be bankrupt within 30 days. And Richard, personally, the forensic accounting shows he's been using business funds for personal expenses, including Victoria's apartment, the Miami property, and various investments. That's embezzlement." William joined the strategy session with news from his own business network. "Richard's reputation in the Manhattan development community is finished. No one will work with him after this." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "I want other women to see that this behavior has consequences." This response surprised everyone in the room, including Sarah herself. 6 months ago, she would have been begging them to go easy on Richard, to preserve his reputation, to protect his feelings even while he was destroying hers. But pregnancy had awakened something fierce and protective in Sarah, not just for herself, but for her daughter and for every other woman who might encounter Richard's pattern of abuse and manipulation. "I want to make a statement," Sarah announced. "Sarah, that might not be advisable," Patricia began. "I want other women to know that financial abuse is real abuse, that emotional manipulation is real abuse, that wealthy men aren't above consequences." William looked at his daughter with pride. "What kind of statement? A public one?" "I want to talk to reporters about what Richard did, how he did it, and why no one should have to tolerate it." Patricia frowned thoughtfully. "It could strengthen our case. Public pressure sometimes encourages favorable settlements." "I don't care about the case," Sarah said. "I care about the women who are living my old life right now, thinking that love is supposed to hurt, thinking they're crazy for questioning their partner's behavior." The next day, Sarah Hartford Mitchell held her first and only press conference on the steps of Manhattan Family Court. Wearing a simple black dress that showed her pregnancy, flanked by her father and her legal team, she delivered a statement that would be quoted in women's magazines for years. "My name is Sarah Hartford Mitchell, and I am here today to say that domestic violence comes in many forms. Financial abuse is real abuse. Emotional manipulation is real abuse. Being made to feel crazy for questioning behavior you know is wrong is real abuse." Reporters shouted questions, but Sarah continued with calm determination. "For 15 years, I made excuses for my husband's behavior. I blamed myself for his anger. I accepted isolation from friends and family. I believed him when he said I was too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding." "Mrs. Mitchell, are you seeking a large financial settlement?" One reporter called out. "I'm seeking justice, not just for myself, but for every woman who has been told that love requires accepting less than she deserves. Love doesn't hit, love doesn't steal, love doesn't lie, and love doesn't make you smaller." Sarah's statement was broadcast on every major news network and shared millions of times on social media. The hashtag #ShekShawarLoveDoesn't hit began trending within hours. Richard watched the press conference from his nearly empty office at Mitchell Development Corporation. His business was collapsing, his reputation was destroyed, and his wife was becoming a symbol of resistance against everything he represented. For the first time in his adult life, Richard Mitchell understood what it felt like to be powerless. His millionaire ex-husband lifestyle was over, and the narcissistic abuse tactics that had controlled Sarah for so long were useless against a woman who was no longer afraid of him. The divorce settlement hearing was scheduled for the following month, and Richard's lawyers were already recommending complete surrender. Sarah Hartford Mitchell had found her voice, and she wasn't planning to stay quiet. 1 month after Sarah's press conference, Richard Mitchell's world had completely collapsed. Mitchell Development Corporation officially filed for bankruptcy. His personal assets were frozen pending the divorce settlement, and his reputation in Manhattan's business community was permanently destroyed, but Richard wasn't ready to surrender. Against his lawyer's advice, he decided to fight the divorce proceedings, believing he could still manipulate the narrative in his favor. "You're making a mistake," Robert Steinberg warned him during a strategy meeting. "Sarah has the evidence, the public support, and unlimited legal resources. Fighting this will only make things worse for you." "I'm not giving that woman everything I've worked for," Richard replied bitterly. 15 years of marriage entitles me to something. "Richard, you hid $4.7 million from her. You committed adultery with multiple women. You assaulted her in a hospital. What exactly do you think you're entitled to?" "I'm entitled to not be destroyed by a vindictive woman and her billionaire father." Steinberg gathered his files with visible frustration. "Then we go to trial. But I'm telling you now, this is going to be a massacre." Meanwhile, Sarah was experiencing the healthiest pregnancy of her life. Dr. Chen marveled at the transformation during each appointment. "Your blood pressure is perfect, your stress levels are minimal, and the baby is developing beautifully," Dr. Chen reported. "How are you feeling emotionally?" "Stronger every day," Sarah replied honestly. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Richard to find some way to hurt me, but he can't reach me anymore. That's what safety feels like." "Sarah, you'd forgotten because you lived without it for so long." Sarah had been using her time productively, working with Patricia Thornton to establish a foundation for women escaping financial abuse. The Margaret Hartford Women's Financial Independence Center was scheduled to open after Sarah's baby was born. "We'll provide legal aid, financial planning, and emotional support," Sarah explained to her father over lunch. "Everything I wish I'd had access to years ago." "Your mother would be proud," William said. "William, she always believed that our experiences, even the painful ones, were meant to help others. I keep thinking about how isolated Richard made me feel, how he convinced me that no one would understand, that no one would believe me, that I was lucky he stayed with someone as difficult as me." "Classic abuser tactics," Patricia noted, joining them for lunch. "Isolation, gaslighting, and creating financial dependence. Richard followed the playbook perfectly, which makes me wonder how many other women he's done this to." Patricia exchanged glances with William. "Actually, Sarah, we need to talk to you about something." Marcus Webb joined them, carrying a thick file. "We've been contacted by 2 other women who were involved with Richard during your marriage. Not just affairs, relationships that followed the same pattern as yours." "What do you mean?" "Women he pursued specifically because they had family money or inheritance. Women he love-bombed initially, then gradually isolated and financially controlled." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "He's done this before. Multiple times. Apparently, Richard Mitchell has a type wealthy women who are emotionally vulnerable due to loss or life transitions." Marcus opened the file and showed Sarah photographs and documents. Jennifer Walsh, divorced mother of 2, inherited $2 million from her parents. Richard dated her for 18 months, gained access to her accounts, then disappeared with $400,000. "When? 2 years before he met you?" Sarah studied the woman's photograph, seeing something familiar in her eyes, the same confused hurt that Sarah had felt for so many years. "Is she willing to testify?" She and another woman, Rebecca Chen, have both agreed to testify about Richard's pattern of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. "This establishes a pattern of predatory behavior. Richard doesn't just cheat on his wives, he specifically targets women with money and systematically defrauds them." Sarah felt her protective instincts surge, not just for herself and her daughter, but for all the women Richard had hurt. I want to meet them. Sarah, that might not be necessary for the legal proceedings. I don't care about the legal proceedings. I care about these women knowing they're not alone. The meeting took place at William's penthouse the following week. Jennifer Walsh and Rebecca Chen were both nervous but determined to share their stories. Jennifer spoke first. Richard told me my grief over my parents' death was making me irrational about money. He said he would help me invest their inheritance wisely. Instead, he transferred funds to accounts I couldn't access, Rebecca added. When I questioned it, he told me I was being paranoid and controlling. Sarah recognized the language immediately. He told me I was too emotional to understand business decisions. That questioning him showed I didn't trust him. The gaslighting was systematic, Jennifer said. He made me feel crazy for having normal concerns about my own money. As the three women shared their experiences, a clear pattern emerged. Richard Mitchell was a predator who specifically targeted women in vulnerable emotional states, gained their trust and financial access, then systematically drained their resources while making them feel grateful for his attention. How many others do you think there are? Sarah asked. Marcus answered quietly. Based on what we've uncovered, potentially dozens over the past 20 years. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. I want to find them. All of them. I want them to know they can speak up. Sarah, that's a massive undertaking, Patricia warned. Good. I want it to be massive. I want every woman Richard ever hurt to know that his pattern of abuse has been exposed. I want him to face consequences for 20 years of predatory behavior. William looked at his daughter with immense pride. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we don't just win this divorce case. We make sure Richard Mitchell never hurts another woman again. Over the next 2 weeks, news of Richard's pattern of financial abuse spread through social media and women's networks. 7 more women came forward with similar stories. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation into financial fraud and elder abuse. Richard, meanwhile, was spiraling into increasingly desperate behavior. He showed up at Sarah's doctor's office, demanding information about her pregnancy. He hired private investigators to follow her father. He made threatening phone calls to Patricia Thornton's office. He's losing control of the narrative, Patricia explained to Sarah. When narcissistic abusers can no longer manipulate their primary victim, they often become dangerous. Are you worried about my safety? I'm worried about your peace of mind. Richard's behavior is escalating because he knows he's lost everything and can't accept responsibility for his own actions. Sarah felt her daughter kick strongly, as if responding to the conversation. He can't hurt us anymore. We're protected by truth, by resources, and by love. Everything he never understood. The divorce trial was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks, and Richard's legal team was already requesting settlement conferences. But Sarah had moved beyond personal victory to a larger mission. She was going to make sure that Richard Mitchell's story became a cautionary tale about the consequences of abusing women who find their strength. The millionaire ex-husband who had controlled her for 15 years was about to face the reckoning of his lifetime, delivered by the woman he had underestimated completely. And Sarah was just getting started. The Manhattan family court had seen many high-profile divorce cases, but the Mitchell proceeding drew unprecedented media attention. Outside the marble courthouse, reporters and women's rights advocates gathered, holding signs reading "Love doesn't hit" and "Financial abuse is real abuse." Sarah arrived with her legal team, now 8 months pregnant and radiating a confidence that cameras captured perfectly. Beside her walked not just Patricia Thornton, but also Jennifer Walsh and Rebecca Chen, the other women who had suffered Richard's pattern of abuse. Richard entered through a side entrance with his drastically reduced legal team. Robert Steinberg had withdrawn from the case after Richard insisted on fighting rather than settling. His new attorney, Michael Torres, looked like a man who knew he was about to lose badly. Judge Margaret Hamilton called the court to order with the gravity befitting a case that had become a symbol of domestic abuse accountability. This court will hear the petition for divorce filed by Sarah Hartford Mitchell against Richard Mitchell, along with associated charges of domestic violence, financial fraud, and asset concealment. Patricia Thornton rose for her opening statement, and her words would later be quoted in legal textbooks about domestic abuse cases. Your Honor, this case represents 15 years of systematic abuse disguised as marriage. The defendant didn't just cheat on his wife. He created an elaborate deception designed to steal her money, destroy her confidence, and maintain control over her life and future. She gestured to the evidence tables laden with documents, photographs, and financial records. We will show that Richard Mitchell is not just an unfaithful husband, but a financial predator who has victimized multiple women over 20 years. Michael Torres attempted to present Richard as a misunderstood businessman whose marriage failed due to normal marital problems. Your Honor, my client made mistakes in his marriage, but Mrs. Mitchell's claims of systematic abuse are exaggerated by her pregnancy hormones and her father's vindictive business practices. Judge Hamilton's expression suggested that blaming pregnancy hormones for recognizing abuse was not a winning legal strategy. Patricia began her case by calling Dr. Chen to the stand. Doctor, can you describe Mrs. Mitchell's health during her marriage compared to after she left her husband? The transformation has been remarkable, Dr. Chen testified. During her marriage, Sarah exhibited classic symptoms of chronic stress, elevated blood pressure, anxiety, disrupted sleep patterns. These symptoms completely resolved once she left the abusive environment. In your medical opinion, was Mrs. Mitchell's health being damaged by her marriage? Absolutely. Chronic stress during pregnancy can cause serious complications for both mother and child. The stress she was experiencing was severe enough to be considered a medical emergency. Torres attempted to suggest that Sarah's health problems were due to normal pregnancy difficulties. But Dr. Chen's testimony was unshakable. Next, Patricia called Victoria Castellanos to the stand. Richard's former mistress appeared nervous but determined. Miss Castellanos, how long were you involved with the defendant? Approximately 14 months. During this time, did Mr. Mitchell tell you he was married? He said he was separated and filing for divorce. He told me his wife was mentally unstable and that staying with her was preventing him from being happy. Shush, girl. When did you discover this was untrue? When I saw the news reports about him assaulting his pregnant wife at the hospital, I realized he had lied to me about everything. Victoria's testimony revealed the extent of Richard's deception. He had maintained separate apartments, separate social circles, and separate financial arrangements, telling each woman that the other didn't exist or was irrelevant to his real life. But the most devastating testimony came from Sarah herself. Patricia guided Sarah through 15 years of systematic emotional and financial abuse, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the constant criticism disguised as concern, the financial control masked as protection. Mrs. Mitchell, can you describe how your husband handled your family money? Richard convinced me to give him power of attorney over my trust fund 3 years ago during a difficult pregnancy. He said it would be easier for him to handle investments while I focused on getting healthy. What happened to that money? He invested it in accounts with only his name, then told me we couldn't afford basic expenses while he was maintaining a second household with another woman. Sarah's testimony was calm, factual, and devastating. She didn't present herself as a helpless victim, but as a woman who had been systematically deceived by someone she trusted. Mrs. Mitchell, why didn't you leave sooner? Sarah considered the question carefully. Because Richard was very skilled at making me doubt my own perceptions. When I questioned his behavior, he told me I was being paranoid. When I worried about money, he said I didn't understand business. When I felt lonely, he said I was too needy. Over time, I lost trust in my own judgment. When did that change? When he hit me in the hospital corridor. Physical violence was the one line I knew couldn't be explained away or blamed on my imagination. Torres attempted to cross-examine Sarah, suggesting she was exaggerating the abuse for financial gain. His strategy backfired spectacularly. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you stand to gain millions of dollars from these allegations? Mr. Torres, I stood to gain millions of dollars by staying silent and accepting abuse. Divorce is expensive, public, and emotionally exhausting. No one goes through this process for money. But you are asking for a substantial financial settlement. I'm asking for the return of money that was legally mine and was stolen from me through fraud and deception. Judge Hamilton interrupted Torres's increasingly desperate questioning. Counsel, Mrs. Mitchell's testimony is consistent with extensive documented evidence. Move on to your next point. The afternoon session brought Jennifer Walsh and Rebecca Chen to the stand, establishing Richard's pattern of predatory behavior toward women with inherited wealth or family resources. Their testimonies revealed an identical pattern: love bombing during courtship, followed by gradual financial control, emotional manipulation, and eventual theft of assets. The defendant has engaged in this pattern for over 20 years. Patricia summarized. Mrs. Mitchell wasn't his first victim, and without intervention, she wouldn't have been his last. The final evidence presentation included the hospital security footage of Richard striking Sarah. The courtroom fell silent as they watched a wealthy, powerful man assault his pregnant wife in a medical facility. Richard's face went pale as he watched his moment of rage broadcast for the court. There was no way to explain it away, no way to blame Sarah's behavior, no way to claim it was anything other than what it was: domestic violence. Your Honor, Patricia concluded, Sarah Mitchell endured 15 years of systematic abuse from a man who viewed her as a source of income rather than a partner. The evidence is overwhelming, the pattern is clear, and the consequences should match the severity of the defendant's actions. Torres made a brief closing argument suggesting that Richard deserved credit for his business success and shouldn't be destroyed for marital mistakes. His argument lasted 12 minutes and convinced no one. Judge Hamilton recessed the court to review the evidence, but her expression suggested the outcome was already decided. Richard sat beside his attorney, finally understanding that his millionaire ex-husband lifestyle was over. The narcissistic abuse tactics that had controlled Sarah for so long were useless in a courtroom where evidence mattered more than manipulation. Sarah, meanwhile, felt her daughter kick strongly, as if celebrating their impending freedom. Justice was about to be served, and it would be comprehensive. Judge Margaret Hamilton returned to the courtroom after a 2-hour recess, carrying a thick folder of notes and looking like a woman who had made the easiest decision of her judicial career. In my 30 years on the bench, Judge Hamilton began, I have rarely encountered such a clear case of systematic domestic abuse, financial fraud, and marital deception. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, finally understanding that his charm and manipulation tactics had no power in a courtroom governed by evidence and law. The defendant, Richard Mitchell, engaged in a 15-year pattern of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and systematic deception. The evidence presented by the plaintiff is overwhelming and undisputed. Sarah felt her daughter kick as if responding to the judge's words. After months of legal proceedings, vindication was finally within reach. Regarding asset division, Judge Hamilton continued, this court finds that Mr. Mitchell systematically hid marital assets, used his wife's trust fund for personal investments without her knowledge, and maintained financial arrangements that constituted theft under New York state law. Patricia Thornton took careful notes as the judge outlined the most comprehensive divorce settlement in recent Manhattan legal history. Mrs. Sarah Mitchell is awarded 75% of all marital assets, including the defendant's hidden offshore accounts, investment properties, and business interests. All assets transferred without Mrs. Mitchell's knowledge must be returned to joint accounts immediately. Richard's face went white as he calculated the financial devastation. His millionaire ex-husband lifestyle wasn't just over. He was about to become genuinely poor for the first time in his adult life. Regarding custody of the unborn child, Judge Hamilton continued, this court grants full legal and physical custody to Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell will be permitted a supervised visitation upon completion of anger management and domestic violence counseling. Furthermore, Mr. Mitchell will pay child support in the amount of $15,000 per month and spousal support of $25,000 per month for a period of 10 years. Torres leaned over to whisper frantically in Richard's ear, but Richard seemed beyond hearing. The magnitude of his losses was finally sinking in. This court also finds Mr. Mitchell in contempt for attempting to hide assets during these proceedings. He is sentenced to 30 days in county jail, suspended pending his cooperation with all asset transfer requirements. Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face, not just for herself, but for every woman who had been told that wealthy, powerful men were above consequences. Your Honor, Patricia rose to address the court. Mrs. Mitchell would like to make a statement. Judge Hamilton nodded approvingly. Sarah stood carefully, her 8-month pregnancy evident to everyone in the courtroom. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. Your Honor, this case was never about money. It was about accountability. For too long, I accepted treatment that I knew was wrong because I was told that love required sacrifice of self. She turned to look directly at Richard. I want every woman watching this to know that financial abuse is real abuse, that emotional manipulation is real abuse, that being made to feel crazy for having normal human needs is real abuse. Love doesn't hit, love doesn't steal, love doesn't lie, and love doesn't make you smaller. Sarah paused, placing her hand on her belly. My daughter will grow up knowing that she deserves partnership, not control, respect, not manipulation, love, not abuse. The courtroom erupted in applause, led by the women's rights advocates who had supported Sarah throughout the proceedings. Judge Hamilton banged her gavel but didn't attempt to stop the applause immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, this court commends you for your courage in speaking out against domestic abuse. Your testimony may help other women recognize and escape similar situations. After the court session ended, Sarah walked out of the courthouse surrounded by her legal team, her father, and the other women who had found the courage to testify against Richard's pattern of abuse. Outside, reporters shouted questions, but Sarah's statement was brief and powerful. Justice was served today, not just for me, but for every woman who has been told that abuse is love, that control is protection, that isolation is care. Sarah's voice carried across the courthouse steps. To the women still living in situations like mine, you are not crazy, you are not alone, and you deserve better. The hashtag #JoshLoveDoesn'tHit trended worldwide within hours, shared by millions of women who recognized elements of their own experiences in Sarah's story. Meanwhile, Richard left the courthouse through a side exit, his legal and financial defeat complete. His business empire was destroyed, his reputation was ruined, and his personal assets were largely gone. Victoria Castellanos waited by his car, not to reconcile, but to serve him with papers for her own lawsuit seeking damages for fraud and emotional distress. Hello, Richard, Victoria said calmly. I thought you should know that 6 more women have come forward. The district attorney is expanding the criminal investigation. Richard looked at the woman who had once been his refuge from his difficult marriage, now seeing him clearly for what he was. Victoria, please, I never meant for any of this to happen. Richard, you meant all of it. That's what makes it so terrible. As Victoria walked away, Richard realized he was completely alone for the first time in his adult life. No woman to manipulate, no business to hide behind, no reputation to protect. 3 weeks later, Sarah went into labor during the final week of legal proceedings. William Hartford received the call while reviewing foundation paperwork for the Margaret Hartford Women's Financial Independence Center. Daddy, it's time, Sarah said calmly. The baby's coming. Sarah's labor was swift and uncomplicated, as if her daughter couldn't wait to enter a world where she would be safe and wanted. Margaret Hartford Mitchell was born at 3:47 a.m., weighing 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Dr. Chen placed the baby in Sarah's arms with a smile. She's perfect. Sarah, completely healthy and beautiful. Sarah looked down at her daughter's face, seeing strength already present in her dark eyes. Hello, baby girl. Mommy's here, and Mommy's never going anywhere. William held his granddaughter for the first time, tears streaming down his face. She looks like her grandmother, strong and determined. She's going to grow up knowing her worth, Sarah said softly. She's going to know that love is supposed to feel safe, not scary. Richard appeared at the hospital the next day, asking to see his daughter. Sarah agreed to supervise visits, but only after he completed court-mandated counseling. The first meeting was awkward and strained. Richard held baby Margaret carefully, but his interaction felt performative rather than genuinely paternal. "She's beautiful," Richard said quietly. "She is," Sarah agreed. "And she's going to grow up protected from the kind of relationship I accepted for too long." Richard looked at Sarah, perhaps seeing her clearly for the first time. "I never meant to hurt you." "Richard, intention doesn't matter when the impact is abuse. What matters now is that Margaret grows up safe and loved." As Richard left the hospital, Sarah realized she felt no anger toward him anymore. He had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the motivation to become the woman she was always meant to be. 2 months later, the Margaret Hartford Women's Financial Independence Center opened in downtown Manhattan. Sarah, now a confident single mother, cut the ribbon while holding her daughter. "My mother always believed that knowledge was the key to freedom," Sarah told the gathered crowd. "Today, we're giving women the knowledge they need to protect themselves and their children from financial abuse." The center provided legal aid, financial planning, counseling, and career training, everything Sarah wished she had accessed years earlier. On the center's opening day, 23 women signed up for services. Within 6 months, the waiting list was 300 names long. Sarah's story had inspired women across the country to recognize financial abuse in their own relationships and seek help. The ripple effects of her courage were immeasurable. 1 year after the divorce settlement, Sarah received a letter from a woman in California who had left her abusive marriage after watching Sarah's courthouse statement online. "You saved my life," the woman wrote. "You showed me that love isn't supposed to hurt and that wealthy, powerful men aren't above consequences. My daughter and I are safe now because you found your voice." Sarah read the letter while baby Margaret napped peacefully in her crib, surrounded by all the security that money could buy, and, more importantly, all the love that money couldn't. The millionaire ex-husband who had tried to control her was now a cautionary tale. While Sarah had become a symbol of strength for women everywhere, love doesn't hit, love doesn't steal, love doesn't lie. And Sarah Hartford Mitchell was living proof that sometimes the strongest women are those who refuse to stay broken. 2 years after the courthouse victory, Sarah Hartford Mitchell stood in her new office at the Margaret Hartford Women's Financial Independence Center, reviewing monthly reports that would have amazed her younger self. The foundation had helped over 1,500 women escape financial abuse, with a success rate that had attracted national attention. Baby Margaret, now a confident toddler, played with blocks in the corner office that Sarah had designed specifically for working mothers. The little girl's first words had been, "Mama Strong," which Sarah considered the highest compliment of her life. "Mama! Up!" Margaret demanded, raising her arms towards Sarah with the imperious confidence of a child who had never doubted her worth or safety. Sarah lifted her daughter, marveling at how much had changed since that terrible day in the hospital corridor. The woman who had once made excuses for abuse was now teaching other women to recognize their own strength. "Mrs. Mitchell." Sarah's assistant, Linda, knocked on the open office door. "There's a young woman here who says she saw your interview on the Today Show. She's been driving since yesterday to get here." Sarah settled Margaret in her play area and walked to the reception room, where a nervous woman in her 20s sat clutching a manila folder. "Hi, I'm Sarah Mitchell. Linda said you wanted to speak with me." The woman looked up with eyes that Sarah recognized immediately, the same confused hurt she had seen in her own mirror for 15 years. "My name is Amanda Peterson. My husband has been hiding money from me, and I think he's planning to leave me with nothing." Amanda's voice shook as she spoke. "I saw you on television talking about financial abuse, and I realized that's what's been happening to me." Sarah sat down beside Amanda, remembering her own journey from confusion to clarity. "Tell me what's been going on." Over the next hour, Amanda described a pattern Sarah knew by heart: gradual financial control, emotional manipulation, isolation from family and friends, and the constant message that she was lucky her husband stayed with someone so difficult. He tells me I'm paranoid when I ask about money, Amanda said, that I don't understand business. That questioning him shows I don't trust him. Amanda, do you have children? A 3-year-old son? That's why I can't leave. I don't have any money of my own. And my husband says no court would give custody to an unemployed mother with no resources. Sarah felt the familiar surge of protective anger that now fueled her advocacy work. Amanda, that's not true. Courts care about the best interests of children, not the size of bank accounts. But how can I prove what he's doing? He's so careful about everything. Sarah opened Amanda's manila folder and found bank statements, investment documents, and photographs, evidence that Amanda had been collecting without even realizing it. You've been building a case without knowing it, Sarah said with admiration. This is exactly the kind of documentation we need. Over the following weeks, Sarah personally guided Amanda through the process of reclaiming her financial independence. The foundation's legal team helped Amanda file for divorce, while the counseling staff helped her rebuild her confidence. I never realized how small I had become, Amanda told Sarah during one of their sessions. He convinced me that needing basic information about our finances made me controlling and suspicious. That's gaslighting, Sarah explained. Making you doubt your own reasonable reactions to unreasonable behavior? Amanda's case progressed rapidly once the evidence was professionally analyzed. Her husband had hidden over $2 million in assets while claiming they couldn't afford childcare, so Amanda could return to work. It's the same pattern, Patricia Thornton observed during a strategy meeting. Financial control to maintain emotional control. These men follow the same playbook. 6 months later, Amanda stood outside the courthouse holding her son's hand, having won full custody and a settlement that would ensure their financial security. She had also landed a job at a marketing firm, rebuilding the career she had abandoned under her husband's pressure. I keep thinking about what you told me, Amanda said to Sarah. That love isn't supposed to make you smaller. My son is going to grow up seeing his mother stand up for herself. Sarah felt the deep satisfaction that came from watching another woman reclaim her power. This was what her mother had meant about turning pain into purpose. The foundation's success had brought unexpected developments. Publishers wanted Sarah to write a book about her experience. Universities invited her to speak about financial abuse. Television producers approached her about documentaries. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source, Richard himself. After 2 years of supervised visits with Margaret, Richard had completed extensive counseling and was slowly building a relationship with his daughter. He would never be the father Sarah had once hoped for, but he was becoming someone who could be trusted with their child's safety. During one visit exchange, Richard asked to speak with Sarah privately. I've been watching what you've built, Richard said quietly. The foundation, the women you're helping. I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you. Sarah studied her ex-husband's face, noting the genuine remorse that had replaced his former arrogance. What do you understand? Richard. I understand that I stole 15 years of your life. Not just the money, though that was theft too, but your confidence, your sense of self, your right to feel safe in your own home. Why are you telling me this? Because my daughter's going to ask me someday why her parents aren't together. And I want to be able to give her an honest answer that doesn't make you the villain of my story. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of closure she hadn't expected. What will you tell her? That I was broken in ways I didn't understand, and instead of fixing myself, I tried to break the person who loved me most. That her mother was brave enough to protect both of them from my damage. This conversation marked a turning point in their co-parenting relationship. Richard would never be someone Sarah could trust romantically, but he was becoming someone she could trust to put Margaret's welfare above his own ego. Meanwhile, the women Richard had victimized before Sarah were rebuilding their lives with the foundation's help. Jennifer Walsh had returned to school and was pursuing a law degree, specializing in financial abuse cases. Rebecca Chen had started a support group for women recovering from narcissistic relationships. "We're creating a network," Sarah told her father during one of their weekly dinners. "Every woman who finds her strength helps other women find theirs." William watched his granddaughter coloring at the table, marveling at the confidence radiating from the 2-year-old who had never known a world where her mother wasn't strong. "Your mother would be amazed by what you've built," William said. "She always believed that our worst experiences could become our greatest gifts to others. I think about her every day, especially when I see women in the foundation who remind me of who I used to be, making excuses, minimizing abuse, believing that love is supposed to hurt." As Margaret grew older, Sarah was careful to age-appropriately explain why Mommy and Daddy didn't live together, never speaking badly of Richard, but always emphasizing that families should feel safe and loving. "Daddy made some bad choices before you were born," Sarah explained to 3-year-old Margaret. "Sometimes grown-ups need to live separately so everyone can be happy and safe." "Are you happy, Mama?" Sarah looked around their bright apartment, thought about the meaningful work she did every day, considered the women whose lives had changed because someone had shown them that abuse wasn't love. "Yes, baby girl, Mama's very happy." On the 5th anniversary of leaving Richard, Sarah received an invitation that surprised her. Victoria Castellanos, Richard's former mistress, had started her own business and wanted to make a donation to the foundation. They met for coffee, two women who had been pitted against each other by the same man's deception. "I wanted to thank you," Victoria said, "for showing me that I was a victim too, even though I was also complicit in hurting you. We were both manipulated by someone who was very skilled at manipulation," Sarah replied. "What matters now is that we both learned to recognize the patterns. I've been thinking about starting a support group for the other women, the ones who realized they were used to hurt someone else's marriage." Sarah smiled at the idea. The foundation would be happy to support that. Healing happens in community. As Sarah walked home from that meeting, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed. The frightened, isolated woman who had made excuses for abuse had become someone who helped other women find their voices. Margaret ran to greet her at the door, chattering about her day at preschool with the excitement of a child who had never doubted that her mother would return. "Mama, Miss Jennifer says you help ladies be brave. Are you brave?" Mama Sarah picked up her daughter, looking into eyes that sparkled with the confidence of a child who had only known love without conditions, protection without control, and strength without apology. "I learned to be brave, sweetheart, and someday, if you ever need to be brave, you'll remember that you come from a long line of strong women who refuse to stay small." That evening, as Margaret slept peacefully in her crib, Sarah received a text from Amanda Peterson. "Got the promotion. My son asked me today why I smile so much now. I told him it's because Mama remembered how to be happy." Sarah smiled, understanding that this was what her mother had meant about legacy, not the money or the buildings or the foundations, but the ripple effects of courage, spreading outward in ways that could never be fully measured. Outside her window, Manhattan glittered with possibilities. Somewhere in those lights were women who were just beginning to recognize their own strength, just starting to understand that love doesn't hit, doesn't steal, doesn't lie. And tomorrow, Sarah would be there to help them remember who they had always been underneath the fear, women who deserved better, who could demand better, and who had the power to create better for themselves and their children. The millionaire ex-husband who had tried to define her was now just a chapter in her story. While Sarah had become the author of her own life and the inspiration for countless others to write better stories for themselves. Love doesn't hit, love doesn't steal, love doesn't lie. And Sarah Hartford Mitchell was living proof that sometimes the strongest women are those who refuse to stay broken, choosing instead to help others heal. The transformation was complete, but the mission would continue for as long as women needed to remember their worth. Margaret stirred in her sleep, and Sarah whispered the promise she made every night. "You will grow up knowing you are enough, exactly as you are. You will never accept less than you deserve. And if you ever forget, Mama will remind you. Outside, the city hummed with 8 million stories of struggle and triumph, loss and recovery, fear and courage. And in one small apartment overlooking Central Park, a mother and daughter slept peacefully, protected by love that lifted instead of diminishing, surrounded by a community of women who had learned that together, they were unbreakable.